I usually record in this home studio of mine, but just lately I've been working in this studio too. Hi guys, it's Emma, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, then welcome to the chaos. I do all things music related on here, from audio engineering style content to production and songwriting challenges to just talking about music and musician life. In fact, today's video is a little bit of a vlog. I've put up some little updates on my socials recently showing that I've been working in a proper studio. I've been learning production and audio engineering because my goal is that I really want to be a producer and I want to be an audio engineer. That's the space I love. I love working in studios and I love working on recordings. I've reached the stage where I'm now working on not just projects of my own, but I've started working on friends projects where it's pay what you can, pay tiny little fees because I mostly need the practice kind of projects, and figure out what I'm still needing to learn and what I'm still getting wrong before I start taking on proper professional projects where people are paying me good money to work on their stuff. And that's the end goal. And a step towards doing that for me was to go from working in just a simple home studio setup like this to a space like this professional studio my friends built. Side note, I did actually help to build this studio as well. So there are actually some cables in here that I soldered myself, which I think is pretty cool. Anyway, not the point. Why hire a space like this though? After all, these days with the access that plugins can give you, the affordable, decent quality equipment you can buy, and enough willpower, why couldn't you just do it all in a little home studio like this? There's some kid out there making the next big hit in a tiny little bedroom with just a Focusrite. You get the picture. But there are obviously big differences between this space and my little home studio space that I think do make it worthwhile hiring out. And also worthwhile spending the time I've been spending in here lately, getting to know the space better and specifically getting to know all the equipment and how to use it properly in here. So I thought I would do a video comparing the two and talking about the kind of work I would be looking to hire out this space for versus the kind of work I'd be happy to do in my home studio space, or maybe even would see that as being better for. And I'd love to hear from any more experienced engineers in the comments who have actually got experience working in pro studios versus working in their own home studio spaces, what you've decided to do in different spaces and why. Because I think that kind of practical side of audio engineering is stuff that we don't necessarily make as much content about because it's not cool, fun audio gear that we can geek out about. But, you know, it's often got a lot of good advice. Anywho, on with the video. Let's start with one of the biggest reasons I would hire a professional space that actually isn't that exciting a reason. It has nothing to do with the equipment in the space itself really, but is a practical one. This is my home, right? I live here. There's an obvious work-life balance aspect there, but then there is also a discomfort kind of aspect to it. Like, taking customers in your home isn't necessarily always going to be that comfortable to do. My home studio in particular is not remotely separate from my house. Like, in order for people to come here and work as a customer, they would literally have to walk through just my ordinary living spaces that I share with other people because I don't live here alone. Clients themselves wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable working in that kind of space. A lot of people might be put off working with me altogether because of that. But I also wouldn't be comfortable with it. Handing out your address to strangers is not massively safe, especially as a woman. And I don't want to just invite strangers into my home to work on their projects, right? Now, some clients might be people I actually already have a prior relationship with, people I have something like a friendship or at the very least a good professional working relationship with, where it's not going to feel as uncomfortable bringing them into this little home studio space. They probably wouldn't have a problem with it, I wouldn't have a problem with it, but that's massively limiting. Like, if I'm only working with people I would be comfortable giving my address to, then I'm not going to be able to work with a massive number of clients. Anyway, let's talk about some of the more interesting and cool reasons why I'd use this space over my home studio space. Starting with how much cooler it looks. Not that this room is bad at all. Clients are more likely to be impressed by a space like this though. The size of it, the stylish decor, and of course all the equipment, they all give the feel of a proper studio, right? And that shouldn't matter, yeah, but let's be honest, it does to people. People are going to take you more seriously if you work in a space that looks professional and has, you know, certain equipment in it. But there is also a practical aspect to it looking good. People record audio content in studios. Yeah, obviously. But they also record visual content. From video podcasts to show reels to live acoustic performance videos. There are all sorts of jobs that someone might hire an engineer to do, and they'd want a space like this to do them in because it's important that they look good. The final video is going to look more polished. This space isn't terrible for that kind of content. I've recorded show reels and acoustic videos in here multiple times in the past. You guys have seen them. But I just want to show you some of the stills from my previous show reel that I recorded in my little home studio space that I think doesn't look too bad. It turned out pretty decent. The sound quality was pretty good in that. But now let's compare it to the show reel that I've been recording over the past few days in this studio. I mean, big thing, I can actually get the camera far enough away to get a full body shot. But also, the lighting looks better, the drum kit in the background looks cool. So for recording that sort of a video, hiring a space like this does make sense. And I'd say this space is absolutely perfect for recording YouTube videos. A lot of the time for things like YouTube and social media content, people actually like a more stripped back kind of home studio feel to that kind of content. Every now and then, depending on what type of content, like if I'm making mic shootout videos, I think that people take mic shootout videos coming from a professional looking studio probably a little bit more seriously than they do just some home studio setup. But a lot of the general audio content and the sort of content that I'm making a lot is going to come across more relatable to people, and people are going to care more about it feeling relatable on YouTube than it feeling like the most ultimate professional thing, right? Anyway, let's talk equipment. Obviously, I could buy whatever equipment I want if I had the budget. I could put fancy outboard equipment in here, a massive desk. I mean, I don't think that would necessarily fit. I'd run out of space in here pretty quickly trying to squeeze equipment in here. Really high quality equipment is expensive. It takes time to earn the money for that. But if that equipment's already in a space that you can just hire, it's also not always massively practical to be using that kind of equipment in a tiny little space like this. Like, there's no practical reason for me to need a massive mixing desk in a space where I don't even have a separate recording room. But a home studio space is generally not designed around working with a client, really, is it? They're usually designed for a lot of self-recording. One of the big things I do in here, and will continue to do in here, is to record myself for various things. Videos like this, my own projects that I put out, and in future, hopefully, I'd be taking things like production music work or session singing work. For that kind of work, I'd be literally just recording myself. And because of that, this space is set up with that in mind. For instance, my mic pre is in my vocal booth because if I need to change settings on it, it's much easier to do it in there. Yes, I do have a vocal booth. Yes, it is made out of an old wardrobe. Yes, it is the thing I'm proudest of in this room. When you're recording yourself, lots of outboard equipment, like outboard compressors and EQs and stuff, is not really that practical to use. Outboard gear has to be recorded in some way with the settings on it. So either you have to actually put the settings on as you're recording in whatever audio it is you want to record in, so my voice, for example, or you have to send that audio back out through that equipment and record that signal back in again with all of the settings on. So you could do a vocal take to do the actual performance and record that, and then send that audio signal back out through all your outboard gear, do your mix on it, print that all on in a new recording. But most of the time, if people are using outboard gear, what they're generally looking to do is, as they are recording, it's all going through that equipment. And if you did want to record yourself in that way and commit in the recording process to the settings, you'd have to keep doing takes to get your settings right, because you can't really monitor your mix that is actually coming out whilst actively performing the part. And obviously, if you've got a really good ear for that stuff, you're going to get it right much quicker than someone who hasn't got a really good ear for that stuff, but you're still going to have to do a certain amount of back and forth to get things right. Whereas, when you're working on someone else's stuff, committing in the recording session can actually work a lot better. Pulling up loads of plugins is slower than simply turning some knobs on some actual outboard gear. And if you're recording someone else's performance, you don't have that same issue of having to go back and forth and check things. You can be checking things as they're performing. You're monitoring it. Usually, they're in the live room, so their performance literally isn't going to have any effect on what you're monitoring in here. And I think it can actually become the more practical option, because often a client is going to want to hear an idea of what the final mix roughly is going to sound like quicker, right? They're going to want to get a feel for what the product is actually going to be at the end of this, because they want to know if it's sounding like they want it to. They want to know if they're happy with it. And also, like, when people hear fully raw recordings without any sort of EQ or compression or reverb and stuff on them, especially of their own voices, people really don't like that, and they find it really off-putting. And being able to actually just quickly throw those settings on before you even start recording the take on some outboard gear is going to get you that sound quicker. Obviously, you know, you can also have presets on plugins that you can quickly throw up, but generally, if you're wanting to tweak settings on a bunch of plugins, you have to flick between the different plugins, and doing anything with a mouse is just more cumbersome. then just literally quickly, I could lean up and do a quick tweak to the EQ on the desk here. I could go over there and quickly tweak the compressor, and that would take me seconds. That quick workflow is generally going to lend itself better to that kind of client work. Obviously, there are no rules saying that you have to work in those particular styles for those particular types of sessions. I could set up a bunch of really good presets on plugins and run that way. I could still commit in the recording process with little bits of outboard gear in my own home studio space or with plugins in my own home studio space. That's doable. But what I have found, you know, not just from the things I've been learning as I've been working on things myself, but mostly what I've learned from watching other engineers and shadowing more experienced engineers, is I do notice the different ways that plugins and outboard gear can affect workflow and some of the practical reasons why I might go for one over the other in a particular session, you know? Not just because of how that outboard gear sounds. I mean, some of it's going to be a question of how that outboard gear sounds, but in some ways, it's also just a question of it being more practical for the session. But the equipment is the only thing that could help me get a superior sound in this space over my home studio. The space itself is also superior for recording certain things. Obviously, I can't record drums in here. And not just because I can't play drums and don't have a drum kit in here. I literally don't... How would I fit a drum kit in this room? It also isn't very practical from a noise level point of view because there's no sort of soundproofing kind of treatment in here. I would get complaints from my neighbors very quickly if I started recording really loud projects in this room without making drastic changes to it to basically make it like a pro studio. And I generally notice that my acoustic guitar recordings in here haven't sounded anywhere near as good as what I've done in here. I think it's just because that live room space is a better treated space. I've treated this space pretty well, but it's very much been adapted for recording rather than designed for recording, right? And that's good enough sometimes. This space is also more suited for guitar amp recording too. And not just because they have a bunch of cool amps I don't have that I can record. I mean, that's also part of it. I mean, maybe I could record it in here. My neighbors probably wouldn't like that if I did that on a very regular basis. And where would I even put the amps? Again, I don't have space for all of that equipment in here. There are amp sims, obviously, and I love an amp sim, right? But scenario, okay? You're working with a band. The guitarist in said band has a particular rig that they bring with them to the session because that's what they go through live, so obviously that's what they want recorded on the record. In that situation, I'm gonna have to set up that amp and record that amp to get that sound. I can't just throw an amp sim to make up for that. I feel like I'm insulting my little home studio, but I'm not. I wouldn't bother hiring out this studio for a lot of projects where I'm just recording myself and the perfect acoustic guitar tone isn't necessary and I can achieve what I need with the tools that I have there. But there are also jobs I would specifically do in this room because this is a better space for it. Mainly, mixing. This is not my studio. These are not my monitors. These are not my headphones. I mean, obviously I can just bring my headphones into the studio, but why would I bother hiring out this space to do mixing and then just bring my headphones with me to mix on? That seems silly. The most important thing when it comes to mixing, right, isn't just what monitors you mix on. It isn't even the acoustic treatment of the space. I mean, the acoustic treatment of the space is pretty important, and I do have plans to improve the acoustic treatment in my little home studio space anyway. But the most important thing, really, is being familiar with the listening environment you're in. Monitoring off of monitors you're very familiar with. In a space you're very familiar with. Using headphones you're very familiar with. Point actually being, this is my space, right? I've mixed in here quite a bit at this point. I've sat and I've listened to lots of music in here, in this room, over these monitors, over my headphones. All of the tools that I use in here, I use regularly. And that's one of the most important things for making mix choices. Yeah, ideally, you treat it well so that you don't end up with random resonating frequencies that aren't actually resonating that badly in the track. It's just the way that it's resonating in the room. But more importantly is that you are familiar with how sound interacts in the space that you're mixing in. And I think it's a lot easier to make a home studio space more suitable as a monitoring environment in terms of the acoustic treatment you can do to it than it is necessarily to make it more suitable as a recording environment. I think that's a little harder. After a while, I may well have worked in here enough that I will mix better in here. But why would I hire this space for the money it would cost to hire this space and drive out here, just to mix. That does seem like a bit of a waste of money. You know, unless I specifically wanted to run a mix through particular gear in here, which, you know, that would be a reason. My little home studio is a fabulous little space. But as I grow as an engineer, learning how to navigate a bigger, more professional space is necessary and fun. I look forward to the first time I bring a customer in here who is a complete stranger, right, to work on their project, because so far it's mostly been people I know, friends that I've worked on stuff with in here. In the meantime, I'm going to keep practicing. And also just generally learning more skills as an audio engineer. You know, being in this room has really thrown up things that, because I'm familiar with my home studio space, because I know how everything works in there, I've gotten complacent with some of the learning, and there are some of the basics that I've now been having to revisit. When you're doing the same type of recording over and over again in the same space with the same equipment that's already set up for you, you don't have to start thinking about things like latency. I really haven't had to worry about latency until I was in this space. Anywho, that's all for this video. And like I said at the start, I'd really love to hear opinions from more experienced engineers in the industry about how you found it working in different types of spaces. If you enjoyed this video, then you may enjoy the content on my channel in general, in which case you might want to hit that subscribe button. But I know that is a big decision to make, so do feel free to check out something else on the channel before you do so. There'll be a video recommended for you on the end screen. If you want to follow me on social media, then all of my links are in the description below. And there are also links down there to where you can find my artist profiles. If you are enjoying the music that you've heard at the end of this video, that's my music. There's also a link down there to my Buy Me a Coffee account for if you want to support me with money. You can send one-off donations on there just to say cool video mate, or you can subscribe to one of my memberships and then that gets you access to extra little bits of content. Okay, that is everything, and I shall see you guys next time with another fun music related video of some sort. Bye!